texts a day. You know, really, for a text to come through at that stage, I knew there was something up, and this is really a matter of, you know, life and death. So the text simply read in block capitals, "Who is Ingrid?" Thinking, well, gosh, you know, I don't know. And I texted back and said, well, I have no idea. You know, what are you on? And anyway, a little bit of a frenzied exchange. I think that probably frenzy would be the best way to describe it. A bit of a frenzied exchange followed, in which it had emerged, apparently, that Jennifer had just passed Andrew, hand in hand, with a beautiful mystery brunette on the seaside walk at Hollywood, and had seen them both obviously very intimately involved with each other, not too intimately involved, it was just hand in hand, and it was obviously a public place, and so this text came through, and we had a bit of an exchange, and so of course I said, well, I don't know who Ingrid is, and I got a description, and I think nice look was how it was described at the time. Obviously, we've worked a bit on that ever since, you know, trying to work that up. But anyhow, nice look, I think, was probably about text number 4. And eventually then, I think Andrew and Ingrid managed to get maybe about 100 yards before I managed to text him with simply "caught on" as my text. And it was only after that then, of course, that the full story then began to emerge. But even after this, ladies and gentlemen, sadly, Andrew was still very reticent about giving away any information whatsoever about Ingrid. And that alerted me, of course, to the fact that this was maybe something slightly more serious than what had gone beforehand. And each time I saw Andrew, I would say to him, oh, well, you know, what about Ingrid? Tell me about Ingrid. And all I would ever get from Andrew was, oh, she's a lovely girl. She's a lovely girl. And so, you know, 2 or 3 days later, I'd be talking to him again and say, well, what about Ingrid? Oh, she's a really lovely girl. She's just the loveliest girl. You know, 2 or 3 days after that, you know, well, any more word about Ingrid? Oh, she's just the loveliest girl. And so really, first of all, I was a little bit depressed at the lack of his descriptive powers. Made me wonder whether his expensive preparatory school, grammar school and university education had been entirely worth the money. But anyway, that's no concern of mine, obviously. And then, whenever I got to know Ingrid a little bit better, I found myself, unfortunately, describing her in exactly the same way. So whenever my work family would ask me, oh, well, what about Ingrid? Because obviously Andrew would come into work every now and again to alert me to his busy timetable. They all know him, and they would say, oh, what about this Ingrid girl? And I would say, oh, she's just really a lovely girl. And disappointed then by my own lack of verbal creativity, I tried to be more expansive, rather foolishly, one day. And thinking entirely innocently, I would have to say, about a very small present, a little token that Andrew had given Ingrid, and Ingrid had been really delighted with. I made the mistake of telling the girls at work that the most charming thing really about Ingrid was the fact that she was very pleased with little things. And it was, of course, taken entirely the wrong way, and much to my regret, Andrew is unfortunately now known by that tag in work, and really does have some quite odd looks whenever he steps inside the coroner's office. But it wasn't just me, of course, who was fascinated by this mysterious Ingrid. We've talked a little bit earlier on today about my mother, who sadly passed away recently. And my mother found out obviously about Ingrid early on and was clearly feeling the same degree of frustration that the rest of us were about the lack of information that was forthcoming from Andrew. And I remember, obviously, I would visit my mother 3 or 4 times a week, and on each visit we would talk about Ingrid, or we would mention it, and my mother would say, well, what more have you learned? She was obviously quite a woman who was quite interested in other people, let's say. And she would ask me, well, what more have you learned? And unfortunately, my mother always had a difficulty in remembering anybody's name. And this could be quite a good thing whenever she was telling you off, because she generally went through 4 or 5 names before she got it right, by which time you could have left whatever room we happened to be in at the time. But she unfortunately had terrific difficulty in remembering Ingrid's name. Ingrid in particular seemed to cause her some trouble. But she was quite hearty, and not to be deterred by simply not getting the right name. She would simply formulate her own name for Ingrid. And so the first name that Ingrid had in our family circle was actually Orchid. Whenever I would go up and speak to my mother, it started then, the first question whenever I came through the door was, well, have you learned anything more about Orchid? Or heard anything more about Orchid? I thought, really, well, you know, that's not a bad name. I've certainly been called a lot worse in my time, and I know Andrew has. So probably not the worst thing to be called. It's quite exotic. It's quite Eastern. You know, I'm sure.